The sun had slipped behind the mountains, leaving only a thin copper glow when Ethan Ward guided his horse along the abandoned trail that cut through the Arizona wilderness like a cracked vein. He had been riding since dawn, seeking nothing but peace after months of hard ranch labor, but loneliness had its own way of whispering in the wind, reminding him how far he lived from town and how few faces he knew. The desert was quiet, too quiet until his horse suddenly halted, snorting the way it did when danger hid somewhere ahead. Ethan scanned the brush, hand drifting toward the revolver holstered at his hip. But before he could dismount, he spotted a small shape collapsed near a cluster of rocks. At first he thought it was a deer, but as he drew closer he saw long, dark hair braided with beads and feathers, the unmistakable clothing of Apache women, and a faint trail of blood soaking into the dust. She was young, barely 20, breathing hard through gritted teeth, her right leg twisted sharply as if she had fallen from a great height. Ethan's pulse thudded. Helping an Apache on Apache land was dangerous. The tribe guarded their territory fiercely, and white men interfering with their people rarely ended well, but leaving her to die wasn't something his conscience could allow. "Missy, you hear me?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. Her eyes opened slightly, sharp as obsidian, filled with pain and suspicion. She muttered something in Apache, words Ethan couldn't understand, but the request in them was clear: help me. And so, despite every risk whispering for him to walk away, Ethan tore strips from his own shirt, cleaned the wound on her leg, wrapped it carefully, and gave her water from his canteen. She drank weakly, never looking away from him, studying him as if memorizing every detail of the stranger who dared to touch her. He placed her gently on his horse and walked alongside, guiding them to a shaded cliffside where she could rest safely until someone from her tribe found her. The woman spoke once more, a word Ethan didn't know, before closing her eyes. Night arrived fast, stars burning like cold sparks across the sky, and he stayed with her until he could no longer feel his fingers. When dawn finally reached the desert floor, 3 Apache warriors appeared silently from the trees. Tall, stern, and painted for war. Ethan raised his hands, expecting the end, but instead of killing him, they simply lifted the woman from where she lay, their movements unusually careful. She said a final word to Ethan, touching his wrist with unexpected gentleness before being carried away. None of the warriors thanked him. None explained anything. None offered even a warning. They simply disappeared into the canyon the same way. Shadows vanish when the sun stands tall. Ethan stood alone, dust swirling around his boots, the memory of her dark eyes lingering in his thoughts. He didn't know her name, and he didn't know what would follow. But as he rode back home, he felt a strange tension in the wind, as if the desert itself watched him. That night, exhausted, he pushed open the door of his small wooden cabin, then froze. His eyes widened, breath catching in his throat. Carved across the wooden door was a strange, unmistakable symbol, a swirling Apache mark, cut deep and fresh, glowing faintly in the moonlight. A warning, or a promise. Ethan stepped back, heart pounding. Someone had been here, someone from her tribe, and the message they left behind was only the beginning. Ethan stared at the carved mark long, enough for the desert wind to grow colder against his skin, long enough for the crickets to quiet as if sensing the shift in the air. The symbol, a crescent crossed by 3 jagged lines, was something he had never seen before, but he could feel its meaning pulsing through the wood. He had been noticed, judged and marked. Whether he was marked as a friend or an enemy, he didn't know. All night he barely slept, listening for footsteps outside, for the thump of hooves or the whisper of arrows cutting the air. Dawn found him awake, leaning on the edge of his porch with a rifle across his lap. Only the quiet returned. Days passed, then a week, but the carved mark remained like a ghostly reminder every time he stepped outside. The feeling of being watched lingered, and he could sense the weight of Apache eyes somewhere in the tree line. Then late one evening, as the sun melted into red across the horizon, he heard it, the distant rhythm of hooves, soft but deliberate. Ethan stiffened. 4 Apache riders approached his property, moving in a slow line, their faces painted with symbols of authority, their expressions unreadable. He didn't reach for his gun. He knew better. The lead warrior dismounted, tall and imposing, wearing an eagle feather headdress that marked him as someone of high rank. Ethan recognized him immediately. The same man who had carried the injured woman away. The warrior placed a fist against his chest, a gesture of respect, though his eyes burned with intensity. "You helped our daughter," the warrior said in broken English, voice deep as thunder. Ethan blinked. "Daughter?" That meant the injured woman wasn't just anyone. She was important. The warrior explained that she had survived because of Ethan's help and that this act carried immense significance among their people. "When a life is saved," the warrior said, "a tie is made. A bond, a debt." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure whether this was a blessing or the beginning of something dangerous. Another rider stepped forward, holding a small knife with an ornately carved handle. Without warning, he walked to Ethan's door and pressed the blade against the carved mark, outlining it with slow ceremonial precision. Ethan tensed. The leader spoke again. "This mark means you are watched, protected, but bound. Protected, bound." The words carried a weight he couldn't fully understand. Before Ethan could ask anything, another rider pointed toward the forest. More riders emerged, dozens, warriors, scouts, elders, forming a silent semicircle around his home. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Why so many? Why here? The leader stepped closer, eyes locking onto his. "Our daughter says you have an honest heart," he said. "For this our people honor you. But know this, other tribes have seen the mark on your door. Enemies of ours. They may come." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Enemies?" he whispered. The warrior nodded gravely. "You saved one life. Now many eyes are on you." The crowd of Apache riders lifted their weapons into the fading light, a salute, a warning, and a promise all at once. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished back into the wilderness, leaving Ethan alone with the carved mark, glowing like prophecy beneath the last colors of sunset. That night, when Ethan sat inside his cabin, lantern flickering softly against the wooden walls, he realized something profound. His life had changed forever. He was no longer just a rancher living on the edge of nowhere. He was tied to a powerful tribe, tied to a woman whose life he had saved, tied to a world of alliances and dangers he didn't yet understand. With a deep breath, he looked at the carved mark again and knew the truth. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would draw him into the heart of Apache mysteries, fierce loyalties and threats waiting in the dark. And as he poured a cup of coffee and glanced at the wilderness outside, he whispered to himself, "If folks want to hear what happens next, they better subscribe. Things are just getting started."